Thanks for joining us in our series of Speaking to Hispanics Thought Exchange. Today we're going to be talking about how to budget effectively for the Hispanic market. It's a challenge. But first, by way of presentation, Carlos Cordova, a Hispanic consumer marketing consultant, also with Marketing SI, and Alvaro Ibarra, who's an associate professor of marketing at Loyola Marymount University with the specialization in integrated marketing communications.
Hello.
So thank you.
Hello.
So how to budget effectively for the Hispanic market. If we step out of the culture wars for a moment, there's really no debate that the American economy is browning. Immigrants are making a huge difference along two particular lines. And if there's no debate either because of denial or because it's undebatable. One is that immigrants are driving population growth.
Yeah.
And the biggest part of that immigrant market is the Hispanic market. And the biggest part of the immigration growth has been the Hispanic market. And second is that it's driving GDP growth, right? So almost 100% of population growth is due to immigrants. And just over a quarter of GDP growth is due to immigrants. So you take those two facts together and you wonder why more marketers are not falling over themselves to get into this market. And one possible theory is budgets. How do we budget for this reality? And in the context of total market approaches and general market holding companies sort of taking over most Hispanic independent agencies, and brands not really understanding where to start. How do we address this issue of where do you start budgeting for the Hispanic market?
You know, one thing we've seen that we're still in recovery mode from the Great Recession of the 2008, 2009. I think at that time we saw a lot of clients had robust multicultural budgets, even dedicated multicultural teams at that time. And because of that recession, a lot of the first in marketing programs became the first out marketing programs. We had losses in our budgets, we had losses in the staffing within the companies and diversity, meaning that a lot of the companies were able to cut back on their budgets at that time and they managed to survive. You know, they managed to maintain market share. It may have dropped, but not to the degree that I think they realized the savings and they said, you know what, we'll take the savings over that loss in market share. I think now we're in a rebuild mode, to your point. The larger population, the larger contribution to GDP. And I think we're finding now that the budgets are recovering so that we are able to have more dedicated original programs. I think in one of the previous video casts you did, there was a conversation on how the total market solution may or may not have been appropriate for the approach that we want to bring to the market, to the dedicated attention to the market. So I think we're in rebuild mode, and the companies that do well, that are following the market, their sales are up. I think there's been a correlation made between the companies that address the market and how they perform in their sales. There's a slow awakening, but the case still needs to be made after all so many years.
And do they allocate budgets, marketing budgets, as a percentage of what the Hispanic or the multi-ethnic market means to them? Or is it still 90% or 95% to general and then we'll do multi-ethnic?
I mean, certainly that was the old math, right?
Yeah.
When it was like 5 or 10% of their total investment. If we were to go by percentages now, it would blow that math out of the water, right? In markets such as here in Los Angeles, Latino populations over 50% of the expenditures. I think what we're finding is certainly is not there, but it does seem that the brands that we've seen it where the brands that are reaping the benefits of the market want to keep that a well-kept secret. It's almost like, I don't want to let the word out. I'm doing well. I'm getting all of my competitors' customers when I do this outreach to this population. I don't want to be in a case study reel. I want to make sure that I'll continue to benefit from the market as I am. So some of the folks that are investing above and beyond are out there. I just think that they just like to keep the market to themselves.
So Alvaro, you've been on the Hispanic agency side.
Sure.
You've been on an Hispanic agency within a general market agency. and then you've been on the client side.
Yeah.
So how do those budgeting decisions get made?
Oh, great question. The first question is that does the client know who their customer is, right? Because if they know their information, their customers make up 30%, 40% of the current base, why are you not allocating that percentage to reach those? I've been involved where it was, let's give some budgeting to the multicultural, some scraps, the 5% or so forth, to see if it does anything, prove itself, compared to, maybe a percentage of what should be the population or the total in the GDP. It depends on who's making the decisions. If you have a CMO who's based off of data and research and knows the power of the Hispanic community, the multicultural community, they're willing to make that investment. If some people are put in place that they don't have a clue, so they play it safe. They play, they don't want to put themselves out there too much. So again, you're fighting with that kind of we need our share. Their comments as well, Hispanic advertising, at least back then, is less expensive. We don't have to spend as much. Prices go up with everything. Mm-hmm. So you always have to make an argument on why they should be spending more in the multicultural community, and also touching on the point that they say, well, it's second, third generation Hispanic, we'll cover that with the English general market advertising. No, when I was with RLR, we handled the multicultural for Verizon Wireless, and we were in top Hispanic markets, but we weren't able to touch the second and third generation Hispanic advertising, even though it would make more sense, the tone, feel, the message. General market had their budget, we had our budget, and ours was always significantly less. And it was constantly, we had to prove ourselves, and we would prove ourselves. We had greater growth, greater return, but we had to justify it always.
So should budgeting be based on, let's say you understand perfectly the data and you understand how much Hispanics are contributing to your business. Should you base it on that demographic profile, or should you base it on some other, because if that were the case, a lot more money would be being spent. So
I think there's a misunderstanding too, or misalignment on how the companies measure the return on their advertising investment. I think they may be giving too much credit to their general market outreach, and perhaps not enough credit to their Latino outreach activities. I think when the companies undertake a robust ROI-based analysis, we would look at, for example, store-level activities. How much are different retail locations selling of your product, and what are the demographics within that store perimeter, who's shopping in that store. We were able to make a case that as the old saying goes, your first Latino dollar, advertising dollar, will be much more efficient than your last general market dollar. Sometimes the multicultural budgeting is only available after they've done completely everything they wanted to do in the English language mainstream advertising. What if you were to say, we're not going to do that last general market effort, let's put this into a robust and measurable effort, and then respond accordingly. I think as what you all guys all see with direct response is that it's not a one-time effort, right? You're continuing to do initiatives, you're sharpening your tools, you're perfecting your media mix. It's not a one-time shot. And definitely that's the approach that we want to take. What is the ROI? And let's all be honest about what the benchmarks are, and we can certainly work off of that.
I think you said something, Alvaro, that's critical. Hispanic media, Hispanic marketing is cheaper than general market. And it's cheaper as a function of the fact that there's not enough money allocated to it. Now, if we were to talk honestly about the value of Spanish media versus the value of general market media, why is it that, and I'm speaking in generalities, but a CPM in general market against 18 to 49 might be $100, but in Hispanic they will not pay more than 65. Whereas if I go to buy a car, or if Maria down the street goes to buy a car, we don't have two separate prices. We have, there's not a pricing for Hispanic and a pricing for general market. It's the same price. The value of the dollar doesn't change. So I think the predicament that all of the Hispanic advertising community faces is the fact that as a whole we're undervalued, and we've grown accustomed to that, and we have succeeded despite the fact that all these roadblocks are being put into it. Why? Simply because our market segment is so valuable to the whole. I find it hard to believe that in 2019 the Hispanic market is still in recovery mode when it's driving the growth of the economy. It's you know,
Yeah, our ecosystem has grown despite everything, despite the recession, despite the sort of the budget apathy along the way. And it becomes a vicious circle, because you can say there's not enough content out there to warrant spending more when the two big brokers of time, let's say Univision and Telemundo, they have fixed inventory and they have more assets, but that's fixed inventory. There's not more content to invest in, but there's not more content because there's not more investment.
And that's arguable too, because there's about 75 cable stations that no advertiser, no big general market advertiser ever thinks about. How many people think of a Pasiones or a Canal Sur? None of them do. Those, and those consumers are basically being underinformed, is essentially what it is. Of course, they watch Telemundo and Univision as well, but we call it sort of nostalgia television because it reminds all of us of our home countries.
Well, so much of that becomes, right, so Univision had its plan, right, to be the one-stop shop,
right.
They'll pick up the phone, make one phone call,
and
you will have a buy. When we specialize in the market like you do, you know about those stations and you know how they can benefit, and you know the tremendous CPM value that you get out of them. If you have somebody who is not buying the market full time, who is not as invested or knowledgeable, will miss out on those opportunities. And I think that's where the education comes in of the client community. That yes, you want to be on Univision because it's what everybody knows and everybody talks about, but there's going to be other opportunities to reach the consumer where that ROI will come in. And I think they need to have their day in the sun, bring you their opportunities as well.
So budgets are a reflection of strategic priority, right? That's why this is such a critical question. So, even preceding how do you budget effectively for the Hispanic market, you have to prioritize it enough to feel like we need to budget for this market. So we came, we've been in performance marketing for a while, but we came out of the branded, integrated marketing world. And my recollection of those times is that budgeting was really a zero-sum game. So they would come to us as Hispanic specialists and say, we've got this, we've got $3 million, $5 million, whatever it was for you to manage a national campaign. And that was some percentage of a bigger, much bigger pie, right? So it was a zero-sum game. They were carving out some general market to reach this Hispanic market. In performance marketing, that's, it's the wrong premise, right? In performance marketing, you basically fish where the fish are.
Right.
And the fish are everywhere. So if you don't fish somewhere, you're not going to capture as many fish as you want to fish. And what we found is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's really it's an ROI accelerator, and the budgets kind of don't matter as long as it's returning. The budgets don't matter. We did a few years back. We did a white paper where we had general market and Spanish campaigns that we were co-managing, and we had a very good sense of the impact of Hispanic on general. And we found that we could contribute 20% of the ROI at 10% of the budget investment.
Yeah.
So that you brought up attribution. If marketers were more focused on not overvaluing the general market contribution to the business and really taking a look at Hispanic, I wonder how things would change.
One thing that I experienced at RR, our strengths sometimes hurt us in the fact that our media department, they were great negotiators. So it's almost assumed, well, you can get more because you're negotiating more than general market. You can't negotiate. In the Hispanic market, they'll tell us, oh, they're willing to wheel and deal. so we're not going to spend as much.
Yeah, there's a general market agency whose name I won't mention. Pardon, it's a Hispanic agency, which is now part of a holding company. But for years, we used to have this consumer good, basically a large consumer good breakfast cereal type client. The budget did not change for 5 years. It was always the same budget. But always the expectation was that they would get more for that same budget. And it grew so small, comparatively speaking, that they had to allocate on a national basis. They could only do either Telemundo or Univision.
Wow.
Whoever threw more stuff at them basically got the
So the market
budget.
outgrew the budget.
The market totally outgrew the budget. The client did not outgrow the market, but it basically, that is absolutely the wrong way to budget, because every year it was a reductive way of budgeting.
Right. The savvy marketers that really understand their business will know where is my volume coming from. Am I selling in the large urban areas? Am I selling in more rural or smaller markets? What are the retailers that carry my products where I'm making my money? Their sales teams completely know where the dollars are coming from.
Well, in fact, Walmart is probably the best example of of a retailer that really knows its business. I think they're probably the largest retailer in Hispanic advertising.
Yeah, there are reports that 30% of their
Right.
advertising
And
budget.
love Walmart or not, you look at their advertising, their Spanish language advertising, and it is very well done, very targeted, speaking to the audience. It's pushing the right buttons. So that's a great example of a retailer that knows who the consumer is. Now the interesting thing is Walmart at one point was rolling out a concept, a Latino focused store concept,
Right.
smaller footprint, and I think they basically said, all of our stores are serving this consumer. We see the key Hispanic SKUs, Nestle
Everywhere,
products, baby products. They're moving as much in these not Latino stores as they are in the Latino-focused stores. Pretty much every store,
Right.
let the store decide what its consumer profile wants to be, which is an amazing liberating way. It's not just 3 stores in certain markets. Now, just depending on what the store is selling, now that store becomes a Latino store, which is amazing. It's a great approach to have.
And also in their advertising, I found that regardless of language, they try to use the same cast. So it can be Spanish language commercial using the same cast, and then you see it later in a general market station, which is very unusual. But I think Walmart is a pioneer. BW is also one that does that a lot in I've noticed in their advertising. They use, so I don't know if they shoot a general market and a Hispanic market at the same time. A lot of people do that, but I think Walmart particularly is very strong in trying to sort of take a total market approach, but a true total market approach, being authentic to each segment of its
a
market.
whole market approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we've seen too is that those folks, at that senior leadership level at VW or Walmart, other companies, they will have certainly a view. They know what the numbers are. They know where the population growth is going to be. Their field teams, the folks at a dealership, the folks at the store manager at that Walmart store in North Carolina that's now seeing a lot of Latino shoppers know what's going on. I think it's just that middle management folks that have 20 responsibilities with budget for 10 of them, right? And they rotate from one assignment to the next. I think that they're in the tougher spot because they understand the senior management mandate, pursue this population, but they really don't have the right tools or the number of tools that they need to have. And so how do they choose?
Yeah. Or I've seen where maybe they're reacting out of somewhat fear-based. Like, I don't want to mess up. I don't want to get it wrong. So instead of what makes the logical choice, instead of what's going to make me a winner or shine or improve numbers, sometimes it's like, well, if I don't want to step out of bounds too much,
Right. Or take that leadership
So,
in that.
so let's do a thought experiment. Let's say we have a client in the financial services business who's not doing anything in Hispanic. They have a a marketing budget that they've been managing for years, and there may be some branding in there, but they have to generate leads, right? They have to generate leads for their brokers, for their agents, for the field. How should they approach this? Do they carve out a piece of their budget and say, let's test it? Do they say, this is a brand new universe? What's the minimum we need to do to make a fair effort, and then build from there? Let's help them along, because that's the majority of a lot of categories: financial services, health services, retail. I mean, that's the majority. Is where do you start?
You know, a lot of these brands forget where they came from. You know, for decades they've been investing in the general market, and so now they get to sprinkle some funds, just re-up on consumer top of mind awareness. Here we need to coming a little bit further back, where the brand used to be decades ago for them.
Right.
So there was some investment spending back in the day, and I think they forget that we cannot just sprinkle a few dollars in the market and boom, magic will happen because we're really good negotiators. But there needs to be some kind of awareness building, as well as selling. Nobody's saying you have to sell, but I do think you may need to carve out a portion of a budget, and I think coming up with legitimate, measurable ROI or KPI metrics, whichever one they want to have, is key. Because I think the problem too that we get into in the back end after a program is, well, what did we deliver, right? Yes, we delivered 30 million impressions. Is that what you were looking for? Were you looking for leads or qualified leads? We found that bringing in and getting on board those local brokers, the local teams, it's the 80-20 rule. 20% of their sales, 80% of the sales will come from 20% of the dedicated brokers. I've had very well-performing non-Hispanic sales managers that love the community and they believe in the community and they trust it. So let's pick our allies on the field and make that story at the corporate level, carve out a portion of the budget, and do something that can generate.
I think in the lead gen and the performance marketing world in general, part of going into this budget game is, at the beginning you have to carve out because it's the money you have, but you're carving out not to replace, but to grow, right? So if you're generating 1,000 leads a month right now and you decide you go Hispanic, you don't do that to generate 1,000 leads a month. You do that so that Hispanic can bring in another 10, 20, 30%. So when you're budgeting, you ought to essentially do that, keep that in mind. Your budget ought to grow to accommodate the growth potential.
And I'll past clients, and I tell my students, are these companies, are these marketers, are they doing that enough research? Are they doing that SWOT analysis? Do they know who their customers are? And what's the percentage of those that are buying their product, using their services? And what is their competition? I mean, what are they spending in the market? Because you may feel, 5% will be sufficient, but then your competition is spending 10 to 15% and you won't get any share of voice.
So it's another factor in deciding how much the budget is. Take a look at what everybody else is doing in your category.
What the competition is doing.
In a sense, there's always, when one thinks of advertising and budgeting, one thinks of branding, of brand advertising primarily. In the performance-driven world, direct response-driven world, the budgeting is, it's kind of self-defined. It's non-existent really, because the only budget allocation comes in when they start, and then the market drives itself.
And it's self-liquidating.
Exactly. So, for example, in our case, our best clients are the clients that really make us adhere to their return on investment, whether it be a ratio of media performance or whether it be a lead gen. We know how we're performing, and we can grow or pare down as the market dictates. Right. That is probably the fairest way to budget, but it doesn't happen in the branding world. In the branding world is too many conflicting rationales and objectives. I think the way you're describing performance media, it's the cleanest vehicle that we have to measure the success of the market. Because, like you said, nobody cares. Is it a Hispanic dollar or general market dollar? It doesn't matter, right? It's the one that gets the most performance out of it that is going to win. In fact, we have dealt with a longtime client where we were, 15% Hispanic, was 15% of their customer base. Right now, we're at 40% of their customer base. And it's all through the growth, it's basically the growth of advertising. They found that the Hispanic consumer is it's much more loyal and spends more, that their advertising and thus their business has grown faster in Hispanic than in general market, despite the recession, by the way.
What we don't know is, are we getting 40% of their budgets, right? We probably aren't. We're probably more productive than the general market side. And we do get that a lot. We have, our clients are very honest with us, is you guys are killing it. Oh, great. So are we increasing the budgets? No, we need that to offset.
Right.
We need that to offset, that, and that goes back to that point that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game.
Yeah,
I mean, it is, I think in boardrooms, in reality, CMOs have to make a decision about where to draw the line on a budget. But I think the point is you have to look at the Hispanic market as a 1 + 1 = 3 proposition.
Right.
And that should inform the budgeting.
Right. And I've seen some companies where they have that additional budget allocated just in case where you're feeding the beast, right? We're getting great returns on multicultural Hispanic, so let's infuse it, let's give it more gasoline, compared to just saying this is just Hispanic, this is just general market, this is, right? So great CMOs will have their budget or side, there's always side budgets. There's additional pockets. You always have to be asking, where you have more additional dollars? Because if something is working, then feed it, keep it going.
The other, we have another client, it's a lead gen client. Their most expensive lead is a Spanish language television lead because it's their best lead. So they're able to charge a premium, which is unheard of, really. They charge a premium for a Hispanic television lead to their agents.
And that's them being sophisticated, right, and understanding and looking under the surface, right? Not just saying, oh, it's more expensive, but there's a benefit to us.
They know the lifetime value of their Hispanic consumer versus the lifetime value of their general market consumer, and the Hispanic consumer has a greater value.
Yeah.
So this is sort of like what you said. They don't want to share it with the rest of the world. They want to keep under the radar. But it basically coincides with everything we know about the Hispanic consumer.
Right. I think too what we fight is what we need to work our way through as well is when you compare a market such as Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. Los Angeles has 5-6 million Hispanics. There's Hispanic millionaires. There's thousands of households making over $100,000, six-figure salaries. And I think advertisers have like a one-trick mindset saying, well, that Spanish language media will have a lot of wasted dollars for me. How do we go after them, in a way that it makes sense? And I think now we need to be savvier in saying broadcast Spanish language media does a great job. Digital, we want to look at them and use that to further segment our audience. So I think in the past has been, we had one hammer and everything was a nail when we reached the market. I think now we can be more sophisticated. And I think the clients have the ability to pursue, okay, I want that specific segment of consumers. So even though in LA I have 6 million, maybe my market is, only 1 million consumers. And I can go after them with different media vehicles. So there's definitely the opportunities, but again, it takes a little bit of taking that extra time as that client of yours saying, when I look at the surface, it really makes sense for me to be in the market. We need more prospects, more clients that take that approach. Look under the surface.
Somebody had brought up the issue of champions. Does having a champion at the client level impact budgeting?
I say yes, because for Verizon Wireless, I worked there and then shifted over to the agency. Mm-hmm. We had our champion who was the head of multicultural. He came from customer service, didn't have a marketing background, but the agency fed him the information, the research, and because of he was our champion, it resulted in our increase of budgets year over year, more markets. We were giving him all the data information so then he can sell out through leadership. That helped the agency, that helped the client itself with more sales. but educating him and he's seeing the benefits or the strength of it definitely benefited all parties.
So I think that answers the thought experiment, right? Is how to budget effectively for the Hispanic market, identify a champion who for your particular situation, brand, DR, ROI, lead gen, whatever it is, will figure out how to test his way into the market and eventually come up with some parameters.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that champion needs the support, the cover of the ROI. Because in as much as they're a champion for the market, they need to have that foundation. They need to have that solid foundation
course.
for
Sure.
them to go out,
Yeah.
right, and put, quote unquote, put themselves out to their senior management. So they need to have that platform, that support, that agency environment that really helps them say, you know what, we're going to make this investment, this is what we'll get out of it. Because they need to go in there and have those internal conversations and provide the, you know, those measurements for success.
In most cases, if it's priority enough to budget, make the commitment to measure it, and in most cases the ROI will pay out, because you bring, particularly if it's a campaign or a product that's never advertised to this market, you're all of a sudden opening a brand new segment.
Is there a reluctance, you think, among marketers, particularly brand marketers, to allocate a fair share to Hispanic because of non-business reasons, meaning, you know, a cultural reluctance? I don't wanna-
Biases.
Biases.
Culture wars.
I mean, you know, it depends what you call that fair share. You know, we'll have clients that just for the dynamics of their product, they may be more of a regional product, and so the Latino population dynamic is different in that region of the country.
Of
So
course.
there's going to be some reasons for that. I think too, there may not be enough available resources internally. We've also seen clients where
So the lack of bandwidth?
lack of bandwidth, but also the lack of, for example, you know, something you would hear back in the day. I don't think you hear it as much, but you know, can I provide the after service in language? If I'm selling in Spanish, does my customer service department, can they provide the service in Spanish? Can we conduct
Which is
a
valid.
transaction
Mm-hmm.
in Spanish? So sometimes it's bandwidth, and other times it's
Capability.
you know, capabilities or just the internal infrastructure. Everything can be solved.
Right.
Everything can be resolved.
Mhm.
I think a lot of the companies in this day and age, if you're going to have a younger employee workforce, chances are they're going to be bilingual if they're in California, Arizona, Texas, many of these places. So just by employing younger folks, you will tend to have a bilingual call center, whether you think you do or
Right.
don't. And we've seen cases where the client is, you know, we are not, you know, legally, or we have liability, we provide in-language services. They listen in on customer service calls and they realize that
half of the time
half
they're-
of them are being done in language, and
Yeah.
they freak out, and the employees are saying they're calling me in Spanish. What else can I do? You know, so there's some infrastructure sometimes that's a barrier for them.
All right, so we've run out of time. Thank you for being with us. If anybody who's watching wants to reach out to anybody on this panel, we're going to post the credits at the end of the show, and feel free to reach out directly, start a dialogue, ask us questions,
And hopefully change some minds.
and hopefully change some minds.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.